that's how they do propaganda in this country and in the US. It's propaganda by omission. So you have a whole world that is unsayable. And journalists don't ask questions. Same with Assange, right? With Julian Assange. Okay, we've got a political prisoner who's been in maximum security here for 5 years. The Prime Minister's never asked about it.
I'm here to tell you very, very quickly about how I am absolutely exploding my growth on YouTube. This tool is called Cast Magic. So, all you have to do is input your link to Cast Magic. It will give you a transcript of your entire podcast or YouTube show. It will give you all of the AI content you could ever imagine, including introductions, speaker bios, keywords, titles, timestamps, threads, promotional tweets, blog posts, and much, much more. You even get Magic Chat where people can treat your podcast like ChatGPT and ask questions about it. There's so much more. Cast Magic and use code CASTING30 to get 30% off. Okay? Thank you. I hope that was fast. Enjoy the podcast.
Let's get going. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I am delighted to be joined for the second time by Matt Kennard. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So you're here to talk about your second edition of The Racket. Yeah. Do you want to hold it up for people? Show the camera.
Which one?
That here, right here. There we go. The Racket. Available to buy when?
In a couple of weeks of June the 13th.
June 13th. Okay. Yeah. Pre-orders obviously available now.
Yeah.
So what made you want to write the first edition, maybe first, and then we'll go on to the second edition?
Yeah, so it's a culmination of many, many years of work, The Racket, and the majority of it is from reporting I did when I was working for the Financial Times in the United States, in New York and Washington, but also around the world. There's reporting from Haiti, Bolivia, Turkey, Palestine, all these places. And what I was seeing when I was reporting was that there is basically an empire running the world. And it has a name, it's the United States. And it's pretty much an invisible empire in the sense that in the Financial Times, I couldn't talk about it. You can't use the term US empire. If you open the Financial Times, likewise with pretty much every broadsheet, you won't see the term US empire. You'll see it used about China sometimes or Russia, but you can't see it about the US. So it's a kind of an amazing thing that the main dynamic governing international affairs, which is the control of the US, is just invisible. So I was going around and kind of seeing how powerful the US was and all the different elements of the US empire, from the military to aid to political and diplomatic pressure it can put on governments, and seeing that it just wasn't, none of it was transferring into the newspaper. And I'd try at various points and be shot down by editors. So I thought, okay, this needs to be exposed. So I quite consciously, actually, from quite early on at the Financial Times, realised I wasn't going to stay there. So I just thought I might as well gather as much information as I can. And because of that, I just kind of went off the reservation when I was in the US. I didn't really have a beat. They gave me a beat, which was regulation when I was in Washington, but I basically did like one story on that.
No, what sense? Regulation in what sense?
Like of companies, look at regulators. You know, when a company wants to buy another company or something, there'll be regulatory agencies. And then later on, they wanted me to cover the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, which was created by Richard Nixon in the 70s. But I did a couple of stories on regulation, but basically I just did whatever I wanted, and I was sort of laid it out in a way that I thought I could use in a book, because I knew I've never got a big advance for a book, so I've always had to kind of like try and construct them while I've been reporting, my everyday reporting. And then I left the Financial Times eventually, and I had this store of information, just thousands of pages of information, and huge amounts of foreign trips, and amazing access to the power players all over the world. So, for example, when I went to Haiti or Bolivia, I would be able to just call up the American embassy and say, I'm working for the Financial Times, can I interview the ambassador? And I'd get the ambassador. So the book's full of testimony from the horse's mouth. And then I put it all together, and I think I added in historical research into the sort of how the U.S. empire was erected post Second World War, and then finally the final part of the book is about kind of resistance as well, which was more reporting I did when I'd left the Financial Times, because I felt like that was a bit of a hole, because I hadn't really had access to the resistance to the empire, because at the Financial Times all I got was... It's interesting actually how the world that is created for a Financial Times journalist, and I guess it works the same for other journalists at big newspapers, is you get a very, very pampered view of the world, and I can see why they all think it works fine if liberal democracy. So for example, if you go to Haiti as an FT journalist, even when I went there a year after the earthquake in 2010, it was a disaster, but you get taken around in a chauffeur-driven car, you go to all the best kind of investments that are being made by USAID or World Bank or whatever it is, and you get this idea of okay, I'm used to a nice hotel, you're like, this works fine. As soon as you're outside that system, you realise, okay, well, the story is very, very different. So after I left, I went to Egypt and Tunisia soon after the Arab Spring. And obviously they were both US-backed dictators that got taken down. Didn't work out very well for the Egyptians in the end, but when I went there was quite a lot of hope, actually. And then I also went to visit the Zapatistas in Mexico, who rose up in 1994 against the Mexican government, the US-backed Mexican government. And again, that was really interesting because it showed that the US empire currently constructed is vulnerable to popular forces if people gain some kind of consciousness about how the system works. And that goes back to what I was saying at the start, is that the doctrinal system and the propaganda system does not allow people to understand the US role in the world and the nefarious nature of it. I mean, we understand that the US is powerful, but we're told they spread freedom and democracy and blah, 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 all that agitprop that we're fed basically from birth. So, yeah, I think the book tries to smash that to pieces, that propaganda, and show actually the US is not different. Like there is no such thing as American exceptionalism, where the US is unlike all previous empires and it's not interested in exploitation and control and dominance. It's about freedom and human rights. It's actually exactly like all the other empires. Obviously, it runs in a different way, but its goals are the same, which are control and dominance. And I think it's a book. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but I think it is kind of a unique book. I don't think there is the kind of journalistic version of this book that there's many academic texts about American empire and American foreign policy, just endless. But there's not many that really had access from the inside. And basically, I see it as a blow in the whistle on the US imperial system.
Yeah, there's almost definitely very few people who've actually had that kind of access, that kind of favourable access, who then come away and write a book with that kind of perspective. Like one of the things that I remember reading Oliver Bullock's book, Butler to the World, and it felt very much like he felt closed off from being able to have the conversations that were necessary to like understand like what Britain is doing in like their butler industry, basically. Did you find that people were like more hostile once you started asking the kind of questions that I imagine you were asking once you got into the interviews, or did they like remain courteous because of the institution you were writing for?
It's a extremely good question and important question, because you were basically trusted if you're an FT journalist. No one knew what my ideas were at all, and I guess they would be surprised, the ones that I would ask specific questions. So to be specific about it, for example, in Haiti, when I was asking about the minimum wage, went to the World Bank, they're sort of taken aback. Like there's a conspiracy of silence. You just don't. No one ever mentions it, so they're just like, okay, this is strange. And it was the same when I covered mining, and I'd ask about how many miners have died in mining accidents in like Rio Tinto's operation in Africa or whatever.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, what? They're not asked that question. And it's an amazing window into how the system works, because people just don't think certain things. So they are free in that sense, but they're only free because they don't even delve into the more dangerous ideas. And as soon as you delve into the dangerous ideas, people know about it. And in fact, when I left the Financial Times, the editor at the time said to me, he said, in a patronising fashion, he said, "Matt, go and do your Save the World stuff, and maybe you can come back when you're a bit older." That's kind of how it is. So people, so that's one part of it. The other part of it is I wasn't publishing this stuff in the Financial Times. So this is kind of like blowing a whistle on the FT and the US system, because the articles that I wrote from Haiti and other places, they didn't include any of this information. I knew you have to play it a bit like a violin. You know what you can say and you can get in, so you can get the odd stuff in, but essentially you're not going to be able to get the real story in. So a lot of them didn't know what I thought, and I think, and the other thing is it was barely covered in the. It definitely wasn't covered in any US media. It was covered. It was reviewed. It hit job in the Guardian. Which was a mistake on their part, I think, because it generated some hype around the book. And actually, a friend of mine at the FT, who I stayed friendly with, he said he overheard two people in a canteen one time talking about it, saying, "Oh, we should write a hit job," and then the other person was like, "No, it's better to just ignore it." And that is true. Like, if you just ignore it, it's much, much better for a book. It goes away. So, but I think now all the issues are still live, and obviously the US empire is a major mainstream issue now because of the genocide in Gaza, and it's a US genocide essentially, because the Israelis couldn't function for a week without US support. So it's better. I think that it's much more mainstream actually than when it first came out, because obviously everyone was talking about the US empire after September 11th and the launch of the War on Terror.
Yeah.
But then it kind of went away a bit, and it's back on the front line now, I think. And also we were on the cusp of like a war in Iran, maybe Yemen. They're bombing regularly as well. So all the issues are still live, and obviously the economic system that this really delves into is still rampant, essentially, all over the world.
Yeah. I kind of want to come back to a couple of things you said there about the where we stand on wars at the minute. But I don't want to get distracted from like talking about the book to begin with.
Yeah.
So if you had to explain to someone what like the racket is in like 60 seconds, like how would you put it?
Well, I think I'd have to start earlier and say like the US empire, or the US has never not been an empire. Mm-hmm. So from the time that the first settlers founded Jamestown in like 1607, they were moving westward straight away. And then they fought the Revolutionary War against the British, because the British, it's not talked about like this. It's talked about the Great War for Independence, but one of the main reasons why the Americans wanted to kick out the Brits was because the Brits were restricting their ability to spread westward. There was a proclamation in the 18th century that said you can't go west of the Appalachian Mountains. When they kicked the Brits out,
really?
And they moved, and actually every significant Indian tribe fought on the side of the British in the Revolutionary War. Anyways,
really?
Yes. So they moved westward
because the British were also against
the expansion. Yeah. Well,
because they wanted to do it eventually themselves, or like.
Yeah. Well, there was also other countries like the French, and then. Thomas Jefferson's held up as this great, like, liberal hero, Enlightenment figure. He he doubled the size of the United States in 1803 with what's called the Louisiana Purchase, which he bought from Napoleon's France.
Yeah.
And then they conquered California, and Oregon, and from Mexico in 1846 to 1848. So, and then they were kept on expanding. The frontier was expanding, and then it was officially closed in 1890. The frontier, the internal frontier, and then in 1893 there was a major financial crash and the worst depression in America's history, and that was like a big debate started about why is this depression happened? What's it about? And there were everyone thought it was a lack of demand, that America was producing too much and they didn't have enough customers. So the sort of elite was saying, well, what we need to do is expand our empire overseas to create a customer base for our manufacturing. The left, I guess, at that time said, well, actually, we should redistribute wealth so poor people can buy. There's more demand from poor people. Anyway, in that context, the Spanish-American War happened in 1898. And that, most historians say that was when the US empire internationally took off, because it was a 3-month war and the Americans defeated Spain, and after that took on their possessions. So that was the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and also Cuba, which they didn't annex, but effectively did. They occupied it, and then they had to. They said to the Cubans, the only way we're going to leave Cuba is if you incorporate the Platt Amendment, which was this thing which passed Congress in 1901. If you incorporate it into the Constitution, and the Platt Amendment basically meant that Cuba was under US control. It gave the US the right to intervene when they signed a treaty, when they took a certain amount of debt, basically just made them a colony, but not officially. Anyway, so that was in 1898. That was the big time for and also it was talked about then. Like there was a big debate in America, because America obviously founded itself, although as I say it was always a westward expanding empire, taking on new territory, purchasing but also conquering. In its sort of myth that it told itself, it was an anti-imperial nation because they kicked out the British Empire, right? Yeah. So at that time, when they took on all Spain's, a bunch of Spain's colonial possessions, there was a big anti-imperialist movement, and there was an anti-imperialist league which was created, had people like Andrew Carnegie, who's a big corporate figure, Mark Twain, others. But basically, they lost out, and that was when the U.S. empire really started, and then it just took off hugely. After the First World War, they really went into Europe, and in fact, the US joined basically because they wanted to they joined in 1917, late, but they said basically the president said we need to join because otherwise we're not going to be at the negotiating table when the war ends, and then they were involved in that, and then it kept all through the first half of the 20th century, even before the Second World War, like they invaded. Countless Central American countries, but not banana republics like Nicaragua, Guatemala, Mexico, and then it really. So you've already got an empire established by then, and then at the end of the Second World War, they came out of the Second World War just with peerless power, and they kind of knew that was going to happen because the previous empires were just devastated. Europe was in ruins. The Western Hemisphere was basically untouched by the Second World War. And they had half the wealth in the world. I think half the global manufacturing was coming from the United States. So it was like an incredible amount of power. And they worked from that moment on to just create a world that worked in American interests. And when I say American interests, I mean American corporate interests, essentially, but also geopolitical control. That's another consideration. And we live in that world still. Like the US, as I said at the start, although you're not allowed to talk about the US empire, it's by far the most powerful empire that's ever existed. There's a historian called Paul Kennedy, who's like seen as the comparative sort of dean of comparative empire studies. And he says that there's nothing ever been even close to the predominance of the US, especially militarily. Like the US, the British Empire was run on the cheap. Essentially, their army was smaller than a lot of European armies. Its navy, which was like its big asset, was only the same size as the next two navies combined. at its height. And when you think about the Americans, like they've got bases they've got 800 bases. They've got military presence in 132 nations out of the 190 which are registered at the UN. They've got the carrier battle groups, which are these huge fleets. They've got 11 of them, which can go around the world anywhere. So basically everywhere is under potential US military attack. And there's never been anything like it. And then also you had the corporate power, which took off hugely after the Civil War as well, because the Bretton Woods institutions were designed at Bretton Woods in the United States, and the Russians never joined actually Bretton Woods because they said this is just a way for the Americans to create a customer base for American corporations. And they had something at the time. They were talking about the dollar gap, which was that. It was the same thing as the 1890s when they were producing so much stuff, but a lot of the world didn't have dollars to buy it, so they did things like the Marshall Plan to put money into Europe to try and get over the dollar gap. Anyway, and then obviously the Cold.
Their businesses get to make the bombs and then rebuild the whole of Europe.
Exactly.
And the banks can finance the rebuild. And earn.
It still happens. Like if you look at if you think of the two biggest recipients of aid in now from the US are Egypt and Israel. 4 billion in the case of Israel and 1.3, I think, in the case of Egypt. And it's all military aid. And the proviso is they have to buy it from American companies. So you had the taxpayer funding these countries, these dictatorships. Well, in the case of Egypt, a dictatorship. Israel, it's not a democracy when you go there. They control millions of people who don't have any right to vote for them. But whatever you want to call it, but these countries get all this taxpayers' aid, but they have to spend it, and it's basically a subsidy to American corporations. Same dynamic as what was set up after the Civil War. And then the Cold War was the US was always much more powerful than the Soviet Union, and it was much more global, its empire. Like the Soviet Union definitely had an empire that focused on the countries and regions around Russia. It wasn't global in the same sense as the United States, and obviously the United States won that war, and it was resurgent after the end of the Cold War. It's kind of now got another competitor in China, but that wasn't 60 seconds. But I'd say that just to go, that was a history lesson. But the racket is an empire which is sometimes called an informal empire or an open door empire. So the US empire runs on the idea that every country in the world has to make itself open to US investment and US corporate power. If it doesn't do that, then we've got the most powerful military in history. We can take you out. And if we don't want to do that, we can also, a stage before that, we have the most powerful intelligence apparatus in the world, which can overthrow your government through more sort of covert means. So, and that's basically how it runs. And if you go up against the United States empire, there are many mechanisms through which they overthrow you. And obviously, the previous book I did, which we talked about last year, is about corporate power, and that's obviously, it's not just US corporations, but essentially the insurance mechanism for enforcing that corporate system, the global, is the US military. They will come in as a last resort, and no one can touch them. So it's hugely important to understand what is the nature of American power, what are the weaknesses, what are the trajectories it's on, because really, if you're trying to construct a government which operates policies in the interest of the people, you're going to come up against the US empire. And in fact, Hugo Chavez said that early on in his presidency in Venezuela. He said, look, I don't have anything against the United States, but if you want to do what I'm doing in Venezuela, you will inevitably piss them off, and they'll come for you. And in fact, they did come for him in 2002. There was a coup against Chavez, which was unsuccessful eventually, but it could have easily being successful. Luckily, it wasn't. So yeah, I'll just finish with this. One of the most important parts of the racket or the US empire is the fact that it has an extremely sophisticated propaganda system, which presents it in a way that's opposite to the reality of what it is. So all the stuff I've talked about just now about projecting power and trying to take resources and promote corporate power, none of that is ever talked about in the mainstream media, academic departments. If you go to the top universities or anything, what I've just said is completely marginal. And every empire has done that. Every empire has had myths that it's told itself and its people to kind of justify exploitation, because no one goes around the world saying we want to just kill you and take your resources. But this,
I think Genghis Khan did that.
What's that?
I think Genghis Khan was dead.
Yeah, maybe Genghis Khan. Yeah, but in recent history, it's amazing how prevalent it is and how impervious to evidence. Because, like, as I said, the FT, even though there's not stupid people, a lot of them, but they would not be able to get their head around the idea that the US isn't some benevolent force, or at least a neutral force, overseeing a kind of a free market system, which is bananas, really, when you look into the reality of it. Yeah,
I think it would require a lot of journalists to question what they've been propping up, and that's probably why most people aren't willing to. It's also like, you do a fantastic job like breaking these things down and reporting on them, but like it's dense for a lot of people.
Yes,
it's like, okay, so you go to school, learn how to learn sort of basic political thing concepts. It's like, it's capitalism versus communism, and then obviously you go to university, you learn a bit more. It's a bit deeper than that, but broadly, like the people who are covering, say, the election at the minute, and they're talking about, when the Tories come up with their ridiculous, like, oh, it's just communism, and then, Labour turn around and be like, oh, you just want cutthroat capitalism, and you just none of these things the reality. But the way that the easiest way for the media to present this story that's going on is just like, oh, they're just having their battle of ideas. It's like, oh, one of them wants to spend a bit more, and the other one wants to save a bit more, and that's a really easy prism to look at it in a lot of senses. And to be that person who sits, I swear half my friends, or most of them, don't have any idea what my actual opinions are, because if you start talking about the Tories, I'll be like, well, they're dickheads. Yeah. And then, you start saying, well, Keir Starmer, he's going to win the landslide, and be like, well, no, he's a dickhead. The third way is often the most difficult path to forge, because then you have to explain why neither option is acceptable, instead of just weighing two options.
Yes, of course. And that is why the propaganda system is so potent, because people are indoctrinated from a young age to believe all these things about one side's this, the other side's that. That's democracy. And when you sort of say no, they're the same team, but they present it as a kind of pluralistic battle to make you think that you live in a democracy, and people are like, oh, okay, well. And then the other thing is, people don't like to be told that they've been lied to for many years. And journalists don't like to be told that they're part of a propaganda system either. So they always say, I can write what I want. And then I would say, well, you can write what you want because they like what you write. That's the thing. And if you write something different, then you'll know about it. And it is interesting how it works, because it's not a Soviet system where you get put in prison or for writing a certain thing or publishing a certain newspaper. We do have a freedom here, which is different. And the media is free. Your editor's not saying don't write that. But it operates in a much more insidious way. It's so interesting. And it's a culture. So you go into somewhere like the FT, and no one's told you what's right. But if you're reading something every day, and everyone around you is saying a certain thing, and certain ideas are just never ever aired, over time you just stop thinking them as well, and you become inured to the whole system, and that's what happens to everyone. The reason never happened to me was I had quite strong ideas, or I didn't understand it in the way I understood it after, or got to understand it while I was there, but I had strong ideas about how the world worked, or how I thought it worked, and I was able to resist becoming part of the kind of homogenous way of thinking. But generally that's very, very rare, and I don't think many people, and as I say, I think this is a red line. Like, it's interesting that the corporate stuff, like silent coup, that is, you can talk about that, actually. There is a space in the mainstream, not a big one, but a space to talk about corporations having too much power and stuff. US empire is like a huge red line. Like, there's no one who can really, like, even in the mainstream, there's hardly any anti-imperialist, when I'm talking, like, writers, like, even people like, say, for example, George Monbiot or Owen Jones or Aditya Chakraborty, who do good stuff on domestic issues. You'd never see them take on, maybe write a column about the CIA's covert war in Syria, which was huge, Operation Timber Sycamore, or anything. So you've got this whole swathe of the world that just isn't critiqued even by left mainstream figures. So I think that for me, like, the US empire, despite being the most powerful empire in the history of the world, despite being the governing dynamic of international affairs, is unspeakable. You can't speak about it. It's unsayable, and we need to change that. And I don't know how you do that, because we're up against a huge, huge infrastructure of propaganda. It's not just the media. It's like whole institutes and think tanks, like NATO. If you look at the think tanks here, like foreign policy ones, like Chatham House or RUSI, or the ones in the US, like Atlantic Council, they're funded. Yeah. They've got all the money. They've got funded by NATO foreign ministries. They're funded by Lockheed Martin, by all these, and they create the discourse. So, and the discourse, that's why it's such a red line, because no one can speak about it.
Yeah, it's like if Lockheed Martin come and they say, right, okay, we want to conduct a study on how our bombs are affecting the world.
Yeah.
And the conclusions could be, well, maybe you shouldn't drop the bombs is never going to be one of the possible conclusions. Yeah, no. It's going to be, maybe you could use more eco-friendly material in building your bombs.
Yes.
Or,
or get like LGBT people to build the bombs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or recycled metal in bullet casings.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, but it's difficult, and even like this, the work we do, Declassified, like, obviously it's a UK context, but it's the same thing. It's like what we say is basically unsayable in the mainstream media, and it's interesting, actually. Like, the preface that I've written for the book is all about how the US controls the UK, which we should probably talk about, because it is interesting, and it was something that I was not aware of in the same way. So, I mean, when I was starting out in journalism, like, everyone knows that the US is the most powerful country in the world. It's intervened in various places, like Haiti and Bolivia, which are places I went to, and against weak states. And they have all these different elements, like the CIA, US military, National Endowment for Democracy, US aid. Now, I always thought, okay, well, that's how the world works in the developing world. But in the UK, the US, it doesn't have that kind of footprint and isn't guiding our democracy or our political system in that way. But it's maybe even more powerful here than it is in those places I mentioned. For example, when I started looking at the US military presence in the UK, there's over 12,000 US troops permanently stationed in the UK across 11 RAF bases, so-called RAF bases. They're not run by the RAF, they're run by the US Air Force, but we have to call them RAF bases. Interestingly, you're not allowed to have any information about what happens on those bases. So the UK government, if you ask any questions, if an MP asks questions, if you send a Freedom of Information Act request, whatever, about anything that happens, they'll say, no, we can't comment on allies' activities in the UK. Mm-hmm. So you can get more information about the UK military here than you can about foreign militaries. They use the same excuse for Israel, for Israeli actions in the UK. Anyway, so you got that. Then you've got the interference in the political system, which they do. through various ways, but one I looked at and talk about in the book is the British American Project, which was set up in the early 1980s at the time of Michael Foot's leadership of the Labour Party, who was the only other Labour leader post-Second World War who was not an Atlanticist after Jeremy Corbyn. So it was Jeremy Corbyn in 2015 to 2020 and Michael Foot in 1980 to 83. And similarly, like they freaked out about Corbyn, they were freaking out about Michael Foot, and they set up this organisation called the British American Project, which was about cultivating the left away from anti-imperialist or unilateralist positions. And it's hilarious. Like, if you look at how they did it, they just basically created this membership organisation, which still exists today. And Peter Mandelson's a prominent member of it, David Miliband, people like that.
Oh,
and
outstanding, really, high integrity characters.
Brilliant people. They many of the people associated with the British American Project were the biggest critics of Jeremy Corbyn, but obviously because he's got a long history of being against US wars. So they use that
unpatriotic of it.
Yeah, and again, it's identity politics stuff. So if you look at who they kind of sign up, they love to sign up like people from ethnic minorities, from sexual diverse sexual backgrounds, that kind of thing. In fact, one of the people that was recruited to the British American Project was the poet Benjamin Zephaniah, who died recently. But he was previously on the board of Declassified, and I interviewed him about how it happened. It was really interesting, like how they recruited him. It was like at the Hay Festival, and they just sort of said to him, "Oh, we've got this really cool organisation that like helps poor kids in the US flourish and whatever it is." And he said he went to one of their meetings in the States, and he just realised straight away, this is not my bag. Like, it was all corporate stuff. It's funded by the US Embassy and BAE Systems and Monsanto and all.
Oh, well, they care about.
Yeah.
They care about.
And he said he was duped. And then another Labour MP, former Labour MP called Emma Dent Code, who was former MP for Kensington. She lost her seat in 2019, but she said she was recruited. They tried to recruit her in the 80s, and it was someone at CND had tried to recruit her, and then she found out subsequently, or she was told, that this woman was working with the CIA.
No way.
So that's not like a conspiracy. That's Emma Dent Code's a serious person, but that's all in that's in the book. So there's the controller, and then there's like another part of the preface is about the National Endowment for Democracy, which is again a democracy promotion organisation, which was set up in the early 80s by President Reagan. And that was about, like, the CIA basically had huge amounts of scandals in the 70s for their covert programs, and there was the Church Committee and stuff, which was to investigate. Yeah. And they were like, "Fuck!" Oh, sorry.
Oh no.
Okay, they were like, "Okay, we need to we need some new way of doing it. We need to maybe not doing it covertly. We just need to be out in the open." So the NED was specifically and consciously created as a kind of overt CIA. So we'll fund unions or peace, freedom groups, but publicly. So, and then I found that they've been funding various different quote unquote independent media organisations in the UK, and it picked up massively in 2015, like Bellingcat, Open Democracy, Article 19, Index on Censorship, which is the CEO of Index on Censorship. Again, this is another example of how the US controls our political system. The CEO of Index on Censorship is Ruth Smee, who is now a Lord, actually, but was previously a Labour MP and was one of the major figures trying to bring down Jeremy Corbyn. She was revealed in one of the WikiLeaks cables as being a strictly protect informant for the US Embassy. So she's quoted in a cable saying, talking about Gordon Brown's election prospects or something along those lines, and it says, Bruce Smee, Strictly Protect. Again, okay, you have a politician who's been exposed as an informant for a foreign power in the UK. You would think that might be a little bit of a scandal, but it's never been mentioned in any British newspaper ever.
Wow.
So you just have this whole world. Can you imagine if it was like, I don't know, Chris Williamson had been exposed as like an informant for the Russian embassy? Like, it would be on the front page of every paper, you know? But because
Could it be the next 20 years
exactly
of Tory, election materials?
But it's assumed that we are the 51st state, so no one cares. Or at least like, it's unsayable in the mainstream media. But it's across. So the US has complete control.
What is the name of the CIA-funded think tank that Rory Stewart was the?
Oh, Le
Circle, yeah. And the interview he did.
With Ash Sarkar.
Yeah, it was the first time anyone had asked him about it.
Exactly,
Like,
and we.
What?
I know, it's mad. That's what I mean. It's like that's how they do propaganda in this country and in the US. It's propaganda by omission. So you just have a whole world that is unsayable. And journalists don't ask questions. Same with Assange, right? With Julian Assange. Okay, we've got political prisoners been in maximum security here for 5 years. The Prime Minister's never asked about it. Like, when Lula came, maybe a year ago, was it the coronation last year, or 2 years ago? When Lula came to the UK, a Brazilian journalist asked him about Assange in London, and he gave it, and I was just thinking, like, that's the president of Brazil asked about it. The political prisoner being held in the UK, and our own Prime Minister's never been asked about it. How can that be? But that is how it works.
Why do you think because this is always the weirdest one for me. It's like Julian Assange is the canary in the coal mine for like do good journalism, like be targeted by large, powerful organizations or governments. It just takes one of them to say the wrong thing about the wrong person or publish the wrong story. And obviously Assange is an extreme case because WikiLeaks dumped so much material online. But they could be in that position, and the key would be no one would give a fuck because they're not Julian Assange.
Yeah.
But they're supporting the precedent that they're putting into place, which criminalizes journalism of the wrong kind.
Yes.
And why do you think that never sinks in to mainstream journalists and to the point of that could be us? Why do they never see that side of it?
Because I think fundamentally they don't see, and not consciously, but fundamentally they don't see their role as exposing power. Their role, so for Assange, he's not a journalist. In fact, they say that. They put him in a different category. So even though he exposed more war crimes by the most powerful country in the world than has ever been exposed, he's not a journalist because he's a hacker, or he's a whatever it is, computer scientist. And I think they do that on purpose because they don't, honestly, and they wouldn't say this to you or to themselves, I don't think, but the reality is, if you work in an organisation like the FT, The Guardian was maybe the only one that wasn't like this, but it is now, or all the other ones, your role is to protect entrenched power. It's not to protect all party political power, because you're allowed to publish scandals like Partygate, exactly, stuff like that. In fact, that's promoted. If you start talking about entrenched power, state power like MI5, MI6, GCHQ, UK military, special forces, no way. That's not your role. That's because you basically, journalism is all about exposing and analysing the froth on the top, and you never look at the actual drink, which is what we did at Declassified, and that's why no one, the mainstream have completely, we've never even been mentioned in the mainstream media, and the UK military, for example, blacklisted us, and they had to write a whole report on what happened, and that report is up on the government website. It's never been written about in a single newspaper. So there's a whole swathe of the world, entrenched power, that just you don't touch. So I think for them, Assange exposed that entrenched world, the deep state, the state that is off limits, that we're not even allowed to know exists. So,
well, if you mention the word CIA in any serious political discussion, people roll their eyes.
Exactly.
That you're in this other room.
But that is a very clever way of controlling the debate, because, especially with the work I've been doing at Declassified, but also in this book, like when I worked for the FT, if you look at the control of and Washington, the CIA is just super, super powerful. And they have huge amounts of power to dictate policy, essentially. They call it the blob. And Obama even talked about this. He said that when he became president, he just got the blob came in, the national security establishment, and just told him, you got to do this, you got to do that, and it's basically impossible to say no to them. But if you talk about that, then you're a conspiracy theorist. When in fact, like it's what they call parapolitics has a huge influence on all policy. And you sit in this country, again, to go back to what I was saying about US organizations and the control here, look at Keir Starmer. He was served on the Trilateral Commission, which you're not even allowed. Again, people roll their eyes and say that. But the Trilateral Commission is a specific thing. It was set up by David Rockefeller, a US banker, chairman of Chase Bank, and and he was linked to the CIA. He was going in and out of the CIA headquarters. At the time he founded the Trilateral Commission in 1973. And it has had Henry Kissinger on it. And Keir Starmer was hired or joined and served on it alongside Kissinger and two former heads of the CIA. And he didn't even tell Jeremy Corbyn. And Jeremy Corbyn told us that he would have blocked it. So, but again, that story, we published that story. No one ever touched that. And you would have thought this guy's going to be prime minister. It is quite important, the fact that he was part of this US or CIA linked organization. And then the other one that we did on Keir Starmer, again, the US shows the US link here that is unsettled, is the fact that he was the head of the CPS during Julian Assange's proposed extradition to Sweden, or for most of it. And he went to Washington 4 times, when he was head of the CPS. 3 of them when he was in charge of Assange's proposed extradition. Now, I asked the CPS for just very, very routine documentation to do with those trips. And they said, we've destroyed everything. It's a public institution, the CBS. It's really scary that they can just say that they've destroyed everything. We published that story, again, it's never entered the mainstream media. So you have the guy who's going to be the most powerful person in this country, who has a history which has just basically been deleted from the mainstream. People will have no idea about the reality, and you get fed all this rubbish. And he's
working class. He's from a working class background.
And it's interesting. The one story we did on him that did get into the mainstream again goes back to this point we were making, which is that you're allowed to talk about the froth. I got access to his expenses records, and they're quite controversial in the sense that he paid tens of thousands of pounds for a chauffeur-driven car when he lived like 2 miles from the CPS office. And that story got into the mainstream media. It got in the Daily Mail, Independent, and I kind of expected it would, because it's perfect, frothy story.
He's not one of you.
Exactly. And it doesn't talk about like deep entrenched interest. It's nothing specific. It doesn't really reveal how the system works. It's just this guy is a bit of a chancer, And that's how the ideological system works. Like, you can't be specific. You can't talk about how. When I think the fact that the CPS destroyed all documentation about his 4 trips to Washington is a much bigger story and tells us much more about who he is and what system we have, but that doesn't get in. And again, it is incredible the training that journalists have to just ignore all this stuff. And it'll be interesting. They're never asked, but I guess if you ever I'm never invited anywhere that a mainstream media journalist is invited. But I would say to them, if I was, like, why do you just ignore all this stuff? Like, Declassified is 2 people. I was 1 person within the FT. Imagine if the resources of the BBC or the Guardian were used to expose the reality of the state and UK foreign policy, US foreign policy.
Yeah.
The
Panorama special.
the system. Exactly, the system would change. Well, not overnight, but very, very quickly, and I think that's why. And that's why journalism is allowed. We do have a free press in the sense that you're not going to go to prison unless you're Julian Assange, but that part of that is because all the good journalism is marginalised and doesn't have a mainstream impact. Is if that started happening, and that's kind of the mistake. Well, not the mistake, but that's the kind of thing that happened with Assange. He started publishing with The Guardian and the New York Times, and the stories were getting global, and Snowden the same, so they had to destroy him. If he'd been marginalised, they wouldn't have cared so much. They would have just marginalised.
Maybe why he survived so long. Because he like used the media of the system itself to try and bring it down.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is a beautiful idea, more difficult to execute, as you know, without getting thrown in prison, basically, or becoming a victim of cyber torture or some sort of weird sonic weapons that the UN thinks is happening. Like, this is like nothing.
Yeah,
that's the wildest one. Like, that they think, like, you know, what's his name, Niels Meltzer, wrote a whole book about Assange's treatment, torture, and his suspicions that he's being subject to those the Havana syndrome type sonic weapons, that there's people have been fucking with him because of in that sense. It's really
well, they plotted to kill him as well. I mean, I remember I went into the embassy a few times, and it was, you could definitely you knew that it was the most hot place in the whole world, essentially. There was surveillance everywhere, and there was a Yahoo News investigation 3 or 4 years ago about how the Pompeo, when he was head of the CIA, asked the CIA to sketch out plans to kill him in London. But the book is dedicated actually to Chelsea Manning, because that is, if you read the book, it basically is the reporting I did for the FT, and then cross-referencing that with all the WikiLeaks cables, and filling in the gaps and filling in the truth. So the Haiti chapter, which opens the book, is when I was sent to Haiti after the earthquake by the FT. And I went around to US aid-funded industrial parks that were being built, talked to the CEO, and then got the kind of nice description of what all the wonderful things they were doing for the workers and stuff. And then you look at the cables and you realise, okay, well, he busted the union of that company, busted their union. They displaced people to build the industrial park. So the WikiLeaks cables are an amazing resource, which is why they're never used by the mainstream media. But if you read the book, it basically is that it's just the truth I got to is through the WikiLeaks cables. It was an amazing, having access to that. I mean, you could argue about putting that much information online, but as a journalist, having access to unfiltered policy documents is just incredible. I mean, world changing, in my opinion. So I think that the history will remember Assange very differently to how he's perceived now, because there's a lot of interest that who have an interest in keeping him demonized and silenced and all the rest of it. When that evaporates, when he either dies or he's gone, then people will start to understand the truth that he did an amazing service to anyone who wants to understand how the world works, because he exposed the most powerful country in the history of the world and its imperial designs and its imperial mechanisms in a way that is just unarguable. And it had a mainstream impact. He also got Edward Snowden out of Hong Kong. That's often not talked about.
He was the guy that got him out of Hong Kong.
Yeah, so he was part of the operation. They sent Sarah Harrison, who was his sidekick, or his not sidekick, but
because I just watched, I've never seen it, the Oliver Snowden film.
Oh yeah.
It was pretty good, really good actually.
Yeah, I haven't seen that actually, but I should watch that.
Yeah,
but there's a good.
That's what Assange needs to change to change the world, not a good
Oliver Stone film. Well, the interesting thing is, for anyone who's watching this, that Oliver Stone is his big topic is the American Empire. Wow. He did a 10-part documentary series on the American Empire, called The Untold History of the United States. and it's available on maybe not YouTube, but one of the platforms, and it's good.
Okay.
And his argument, and he's saying if you listen to it, because he served in Vietnam, he signed up, served in Vietnam, and then later on realised that he'd been fed a whole bag of shit basically about what the United States' real role in the world is, and that's when his political awakening happened. And it's like the issue that exercises him the most now. And it's work. Again, he says, like, I was brought up from school to believe certain things about America, which were the opposite of the truth. His argument actually is quite interesting. He thinks that there were certain points that America moved away from the ideals that were real when they were first founded. I mean, for me, I think that's it's always been a bit of a myth.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like the whole country was founded on ethnically cleansing and exterminating the indigenous population.
Yeah.
And putting them on small reservations. It was also founded. The economy was founded on like maybe the most brutal form of slavery that's ever existed in the American South. Like,
oh, I don't know if I'd be willing to say most brutal form ever.
That's what they
like, is that what they say? Is that like people
like
say?
There were before the Civil War, yeah. But those are
slavery's always awful generally.
Yeah, exactly. But the brutality of it was worse in some places.
What, like conditions, working, things like that.
But either way, like that was. I mean, there's there's parts of America which are like the Constitution does enshrine freedom of speech.
I mean, in terms
the
of
First
like,
Amendment,
a political document that set out for a country, it's pretty. I would say, especially for its time, and what it's become is not the thing it is. Like what they laid out initially, if you just look at a purely just like form of like system of government, like it's very comprehensive in that like it lays out how to have a state that's not like too overreaching. Obviously it has not. Do you know what I mean? But all of the imperialism basically of America has grown around that. With like I'm almost certain, it's been a while since I've looked at any of this stuff. I'm almost certain that the initial, like the founding documents at least, they were like looking for like a small, like restricted state with some federal area, like states to like state governments, and like I think that they probably had the good intentions at least for what they were trying to achieve, and I think America probably did represent something.
Yes, it
did. Like something like in every country is a lie in a way. Do you know what I mean? The myths that we tell ourselves are always a lie, but I think that I would probably be inclined to agree with Oliver Stone. Obviously based on nothing but speculation.
No.
I didn't live through that period.
Yeah.
But like, I think that it did used to stand for something better than it does now.
Yeah. But I mean, it depends where you draw that line. Like even from, up to the late 19th century, it was basically an empire. It was cleansing its national territory. From that moment onwards, it was fighting awful wars, it fought a war in the Philippines, which was just savage, and that's where they first waterboarding was first used and stuff like that, and thousands were killed, and that was just to stop Philippines independence, which was when they kicked out the Spanish. So I don't know if I agree with Stone. I think that he also loves JFK. Yeah. His whole thing is that JFK was the last US president who was not under the control of the blob or the national security state.
I mean, I'd be inclined
that might be true.
Yeah.
But then
I honestly think you can make a case that Nixon wasn't, because they ousted him.
Yeah. Well, it's like Trump, isn't it? On the right. Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah. In the exact same sense, it doesn't make Nixon a great person.
No. I know what you mean. No.
Trump's charges not being.
But then again, but that's the thing with Stone's argument is it doesn't really add up, because then you got Bay of Pigs when he invaded Cuba through proxy forces. He also the Vietnam build-up. Vietnam War effectively began under him. I don't know. Yeah, he was definitely like someone like JFK couldn't become president now.
No.
Like Obama was like a good politician in the sense that like he was presentable. Exactly.
If Obama had done what he said he stood for, he would have been considered the modern JFK.
Yeah, but he didn't.
Because he said all the same things without them backing them up because hypothetically.
Well, I think the American system is like you say, it lasted. It was designed in a way that lasted a long time, functioning in a sort of very dodgy way, but it did kind of function. But now, like the whole system is captured by corporate interests and also by the national security state within the blob is so powerful. They basically run the whole thing, and that's because the agencies just got too big, and they need to be. What JFK said about the CIA? So they want to smash it into a thousand pieces. Yeah,
throw it to the wind.
And then he was killed, but we don't know who by.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is kind of collapsing internally. I think that the major problems for America now is not its foreign policy and its foreign domination, because it's, as I say, it's so far ahead of anyone else. But its domestic policy and domestic population is just fractious. I know it sounds like crazy thing to say, but you could have civil war there easily. Like with Trump is a major problem because they don't want him to be the blob.
Yeah.
Washington, the liberal establishment do not want him, or even the conservative establishment do not want him anywhere near the presidency again. So he's super popular.
The unpopularity of the blob makes him increasingly popular because he's seen as a victim of it.
Yeah.
He was polling horrendously before they started all the trials.
Yeah.
Like even amongst his base, he wasn't doing that good. Amongst like likely conservative or Republican voters in the primary, he wasn't doing that good. And then they started going at him, and that's when he became popular. Like you can see it. Like you can watch as they stacked up the prosecutions and the media coverage against him. He's becoming increasingly more popular because everyone's like, well, I don't like the blob, and maybe I don't like Trump, and maybe he's really selfish and out for himself. But screw those people. If they don't want him that bad, and I think he's going to win in landslide because of
they let him stand.
If they let him stand. No, I think there would actually be civil war.
That's what I mean. If he stands, he'll win. I agree. And then it's going to be carnage anyway. But if he doesn't stand,
I don't think it's going to be worse than the current.
But he got convicted of what? 34 felonies.
Yeah. So do you know what that was?
And the sentencing's
30. It was 34 felonies because it was 34 different payments made to Michael Cohen. So it was the same accusation, but 34 different.
But it's not outlandish to think that could land him some jail time, right? My understanding of it is that normally this is like a misdemeanor, like a civil thing, basically, and it would never get to a criminal proceeding in the way it has, but they're going to appeal on the basis that it's no pun intended, trumped up charges. Right.
That seems to be the arguments going on at the minute. And from what I can tell, it doesn't seem like people would normally be prosecuted in the same way as Trump has been. Right. That doesn't mean that it wasn't illegal, because it definitely seems like he was breaking campaign finance law. The question is whether it warrants the criminal trial or whether it should just be considered a misdemeanor offense. And I'm not sure what the precedent is on that, but that's
Do you think that it's politically motivated?
Yeah, 100%.
You got what's the evidence for that? I'm not saying it's
not the evidence. I would say that there's two things that make me think that is they're using anything they can to try and stop him running. I would prefer neither of them won. But I think they're trying everything, and that's the latest. And two, because if you've seen the list of releases about things that came out about his son or about the Biden family, it's one day Biden family story, about the laptop or about Ashley Biden or about some corruption stuff. Next day, Trump indictment. Story, indictment. Story, indictment.
Interesting.
And I don't have enough evidence to say that that's definitely what's happening, but it's like a pattern that I'm looking at being like, and from what I've seen, that like most people would not be charged in the way that he has.
I don't think it's resolved if he wins, like in the way that you're saying. Like, I think that civil war is a possibility.
I think
anyway.
It still gets worse.
Yeah, because he might do something that. No. What I mean is he might do something against the Democrats, and then
see, they thought that last time, right? And he did. He could have gone after Hillary Clinton for the acid washing the email service, right? Yeah. And he didn't. And that's normally the way that the American establishment functions. Is like, the next person comes in and goes, oh, that's all right. Well, forget about that. Like, and Trump did the same thing as the norm. And now, now they've thought, okay, we can't have him win again. Or they've just decided, he needs to be prosecuted because he seems to keep skirting the law. Yeah. So I think that it will get worse, regardless of who wins. Like, if Biden wins, not a single Republican will believe it. Not one.
Yeah, it's not
good. If Trump wins, what's the same 2016 meltdown, but I think in a more vindictive and volatile way.
But also, they could do it like, I don't know, there's going to be some serious subterfuge to try and get rid of Trump if he wins. Like there was last time. I mean, remember they were leaking, like they were doing explicitly, they didn't even care. Like they were just like leaking like his private conversations to the press and stuff. Yes, it's scary. I mean,
I don't know what the better option is. I think my instinct.
I think it's better if he's. I think it'd be a nightmare if he's not allowed to stand, and if he is allowed to stand, he'll win, in my opinion, easily. Like he's up against Biden, he can barely string a sentence together.
He's a corpse.
Yeah,
it's really
mad.
depressing.
It's mad. Also, this whole Israel thing is like seeing him get up on stage and basically just lie. Like he said, I've seen photos of beheaded babies or something. Like which was a story that is now being proven to be false. Mm-hmm. And so he's like willing to lie. And he's like meant to be the most powerful man in the world, but yet he's lying on behalf of a country that's got the same population as London. Like it's weird.
Not effectively either.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what. It's an empire in decline. It's obvious.
Yeah, Biden feels a little bit like Hindenburg-y to me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that it is scary for the world because an empire in decline is a dangerous empire, and also they've got their comparative advantage is all military. Like China are going to outstrip them economically very soon. They're going to be a bigger economy, in maybe 10 years.
But the entire global economy runs on dollars. Yeah, and the that's the other issue. It's like the entire world is literally tied to the US economy.
Yeah, less and less though. The de-dollarization is a thing now.
It is, but the problem is, that might not affect the larger world as China's influence grows and maybe BRICS comes in with their own payment system and the dollar becomes less of a thing. But the main problem is that every single central bank on the planet basically uses dollars as their backup, right? So if you say you're a new country or any country, say you're Italy, right? And you leave the euro and you decide you want to have, Italian, I don't even know what it was before, Italian dollars for the sake of it, okay?
Lira, right?
Lira, not been lira, lira, okay, lira. You have to then go and make sure that in case your currency is hit by the volatile waves of global trade and finance, that you're able to back everything up and you need reserves that aren't your currency, so you have to buy dollars. And the World Bank and the IMF are going to be right, you have to have dollars or we won't let your currency float on the global markets. So every single central bank in the world practically has dollars as their reserve currency. And as the world economy grows, a larger and larger portion of those dollars ends up in the reserves of the central bank. So the US has to keep printing money and sending it out around the world to stack up the growth of the global economy. And if anyone stops using dollars as that, which would mean the IMF and the World Bank would all have, the US military and empire would have to say, okay, that's fine, which is unlikely. But say they didn't, and they said, okay, fine, you take yen or BRICS new currency or Bitcoin or whatever stupid thing you want. The US economy goes into free fall at that point. and the dollar becomes worthless as more and more dollars come back from like accounts that are sitting around the world. And the entire Western economy that's linked to American, like the American economy and manufacturing and exports, we would just go.
Yeah.
So we basically have to deal with the effects of being like that satellite of the American empire, or go through horrendous economic pain, the likes of which we probably no understanding of.
Yeah.
Those are the two options.
Yeah, it's not looking good, is it?
No. Anyway, we have talked for longer than I thought, so we're gonna have to wrap things up.
Okay.
But yeah, book, I will put a link in the description. Any wild predictions for the election?
Well, the UK one or the US? We've done the US.
Yeah, we've done the US.
UK, well, it's going to be a Labour landslide, and it's going to be the same. To be honest with you, I think that it's going to be a landslide for Labour, but I think within a year of the Starmer regime, it's going to get quite interesting in this country. Maybe very interesting, because people have been sold the lie for like 15 years nearly, like that all we need to do is get the Tories out and you'll be all right. And a lot of people think that. I mean, the Tories are awful, don't get me wrong, they are awful. I was trying to think the other day if there's anything in the whole country that is actually better after the 14 years of Tory rule. I can't think of anything. Everything's worse. But the Labour government are going to do basically the same thing, and I think people are going to realise that quite quickly. And they should have realised it already, to be honest, because Starmer basically telegraphs it every day.
He's not coy about it.
No, he's not. He's not. Even like the 2-child benefit cap, like which has put loads and loads of kids into poverty. He's like really held on to that, even though it's like it's not done him much good. Well, maybe it has in the sort of like right wing part of Britain. But anyway,
but that doesn't even make sense to me either, because the right wing, a lot of people who will go and vote for reform and Farage would prefer that, like, they would prefer we didn't have high levels of immigration, right? So in order to survive as a country, you need like replacement rate people, okay? And if that's not coming from immigration, which it currently is in a lot of senses, that has to come from people having kids, right? So you want people to have children. So give them fucking benefits in order to allow them to have the big families that you want them to do. Like, you know that.
It's mad. It's all, even just on a human level, like it's not a lot of money. It's compared to what we spend, for example, we're going to spend on Trident or whatever. Like this is about like just and it's the stats are really like it's put thousands of kids into poverty. So why just reverse that? It's just ridiculous. But anyway, he supports that, and I think people are going to realise, okay, well, we've got the same basically with minor variations. We've got the same government. We don't live in a democracy in a sense that we can vote for a party that isn't basically the Tory Labour uni party. Yeah. And then I don't know. It's hard to predict what then the connotation of that is, but there will be some.
My fear is the Tories come storming back.
Well, then definitely, I think what it does, it pushes people to extremes. It pushes people to the right or the left. I think the right is in a much more powerful position in this country, maybe globally as well, to take advantage because their messaging is much easier because they blame it all on immigrants and whatever. Like the left got smashed. The left of the sort of Corbynite part of the Labour Party, which is millions of people if you count like the sort of grassroots. They got completely smashed. I mean, Corbyn can't even stand as a Labour candidate. If I told you that in 2019, you wouldn't believe me. So
he's not the only one. There's loads of them being.
Faisal Shaheen, who is not like said
for liking a John Stewart sketch,
and it's so naked.
It's a pretty funny sketch.
Yeah, it's so naked. What this is though, it's a campaign to destroy the left, and it was from 2015 onwards. But it's been pretty successful. They smashed the left. The left kind of effed themselves over by not fighting back, especially on the anti-Semitism stuff. But anyways, they've been successful. The left's been successfully destroyed in the service of the Labour right and the British establishment and the Israeli and all these different elements. And the right, they're kind of resurgent. And it is scary. And also, like, the Conservative Party basically have to be reactive to it or they're going to get outflanked by and I think they will react to it and they'll just move further and further right. Suella Braverman The fact that she was kept on by Rishi Sunak, shows you that they're going that way. So it's not looking good.
But the problem, it really frustrates me that their way to deal with people's complaints about their policies, right, are not to deal with their complaints. It's to put more extreme reactionaries in the positions of power.
Yeah.
It's not to be sensible adults and deal with the job of governing a nation in a way that okay, let's look at this. People would like less immigration. We need some immigration because, skill shortages, people cycle through the country in and out. Just, it's a thing that countries want to be able to do, is bring in skilled or unskilled or workers to, I can't express it anymore. It's a thing that countries do. They have some immigration, right? And then you could look at that and go, okay, well, perhaps we need to stand up and say we can have someone sensible that's not Priti Patel or Sarah Braverman and go, right, okay, we've listened to you. We would like to reduce immigration. Here's what we're going to do to try and reduce it. Great. Not, let's just fly some asylum seekers to Rwanda. Not address the actual fucking issue that people are talking about.
Yes.
Okay, they're concerned that, say, public services can't keep up or infrastructure can't keep up with the rate of population growth. Deal with that fucking problem and you would get elected ad infinitum.
But we don't have, we do not have a government. We have a PR agency. That's what it is. There's no long-term thinking. It's just they sit around thinking what is going to play well to the population. So they come up with gimmicky things. They're okay, well, we've seen some polling that people want to ban disposable vapes. Let's do that. Or and Labour are as bad as the Tories. If you look at what Keir Starmer says, everything is just based on it's been focus group to death. And I agree with you. There's no long-term thinking, which is scary. These politicians, they do not care about the country.
Yeah.
They care about getting elected and how are we going to do that? What is the majoritarian opinion? How can we think of what's the best way to present a policy that people will like? As you say, nothing that the country needs is getting addressed.
Yeah, and while they ignore it in the middle, people are just veering extreme to the extreme left or right.
But not only to the left either.
Well, the left do their own thing.
No, I know what you mean, but
people are veering to the extremes in order to have their problem solved because the sensible centrists pretend they care but don't do a fucking thing. Anyway, we have to finish because I have to pack this stuff up and we're done with the group. So Matt, thanks very much for coming on the show. People buy your book, hopefully, and vote in the election.
Yeah.
Hey, listeners, real quick. Do you ever find yourself sitting watching the stock market like this? Well, now you could instead be ordering my book like this. It's the story of GameStop. You can purchase it with a hoodie, with acknowledgements, or just with the early backers edition. It's all about the GameStop story. It's the real story, not just what you've seen on films. It's exactly what has happened over the last 3.5 years. And with DFE back, I'm finally able to draw a conclusion to my book. Please pre-order it. It really helps me out, and you will get it eventually, I promise. Hopefully this year.